The nightmare for the Kremlin has arrived. Across Russia, the fuel arteries keeping 142 million people alive are exploding. This is not an accident. Vladimir Putin spent 3 years cannibalizing Russia's domestic survival to fund an invasion. And in January 2026, the system hit its breaking point. While Putin sits behind the gold-plated walls of the Kremlin, the heartland's energy infrastructure is being erased. The scale of the disaster is staggering. According to Militarny, explosions damaged oil and gas pipelines in Russia's most critical corridors, specifically targeting the high-pressure veins feeding national heating systems. The most devastating blow occurred near Romanovka, where the Central Asia Center pipeline, a massive artery moving 12 billion cubic meters of gas, suffered a catastrophic blowout. This is the zero day the Russian people were never prepared for. By prioritizing artillery shells over the maintenance of 200,000 miles of aging pipes, Putin effectively sealed the fate of his own citizens. The data proves this is a systemic execution of the Russian state. In a desperate bid to fill a $100 billion budget hole, Putin halved the funding for communal infrastructure, leaving 1/3 of the nation's heating networks in critical decay. Now, as those networks fail in the dead of winter, 142 million people are discovering the true cost of Kremlin arrogance. Russia is no longer a superpower. It is a freezing landscape where the fuel is running out and the lights are flickering. Ukraine has successfully moved the war from the trenches to the balance sheet. Every explosion on a pipeline and every frozen town is a direct result of Putin's decision to burn the Russian future to save his own past. The human cost of Putin's budget crater has arrived in the Siberian heartland. In the district of Zheleznodorozhny, the social contract has been frozen solid. For over a week, 5,000 residents have been trapped in sub-zero apartments without heat. With temperatures plummeting to -25 degrees Celsius, families are being forced to burn their own furniture and floorboards just to keep their children from freezing to death. Imagine a grandmother in a concrete Soviet-era apartment watching frost creep across the inside of her windows. No help is coming. Local technicians were sent to the front, and spare parts were never manufactured because the factory was busy making tank treads. This was a deliberate choice made inside the Kremlin. While Putin funnels trillions into missiles, the infrastructure of the Russian people is being cannibalized for parts. Russia's own agencies admit 1/3 of all heating networks are in critical condition. But instead of fixing Zheleznodorozhny, Putin redirected those funds into the meat grinder. The result is a nation where the state builds high-tech drones while citizens live like medieval peasants huddled around open flames. To make matters worse, a massive 22% VAT hike hit every grocery store on January 1st, 2026. While residents struggle for warmth, they now pay a war tax on bread. Putin is no longer a protector. He is a debt collector, squeezing a freezing population to fill a bankrupt treasury. Russia claims to be an energy superpower, yet it cannot keep radiators warm in its own backyard. The collapse of the Russian state is happening through violent, high-pressure eruptions. In Volgograd, near Romanovka, the physical limits of Putin's empire were reached. The Central Asia Center pipeline, responsible for moving 12 billion cubic meters of gas annually, suffered a catastrophic blowout that sent a pillar of fire into the sky visible for miles. While the Kremlin blamed natural soil movement, the reality exposed by Militarny is clear. Russia's energy backbone is snapping. This pipeline was a lifeline for the budget and the heating of millions. The Romanovka explosion severed a primary vein, feeding the heart of the country. For decades, the Kremlin relied on these Soviet-era arteries to project power. But maintenance budgets were looted for war. The pipes are old, the pressure is high, and the repair money has been turned into artillery shells. The zero-day scenario for gas is now reality. When a pipeline this size fails, pressure drops across the entire regional network, leaving hundreds of thousands in thermal collapse. Putin's decision to ignore infrastructure failure has transformed Russia's greatest asset into its greatest liability. This is the true face of the $100 billion budget hole. Every day the Romanovka artery remains cold, the economy bleeds out. While Moscow talks of victory, the people of Volgograd are staring at the charred remains of their future. The arteries of the state are bursting, and the Kremlin has no way to stitch them back together. While pipelines snap from neglect, the energy sources are being hunted from the outside. In January, Ukraine shifted the front line into the Kremlin's offshore bank account. In high-precision strikes, Ukrainian special operations targeted the crown jewels of Russian production in the Caspian Sea. The V. Filanovsky, Yuri Korchagin, and Valery Grafer platforms. These were not just rigs. They were the life support of the Russian economy. By striking these Lukoil platforms, Ukraine cut the throat of the industry funding Putin's $100 billion war machine. For people in Zheleznodorozhny and Volgograd, the fuel they are waiting for is not just delayed. It is no longer being pulled from the earth. The energy arteries are being hit at the root and the branch simultaneously. The strategic brilliance of this Caspian execution forces the Kremlin into a financial death spiral. According to Militarny, these explosions caused irreparable damage to infrastructure Russia cannot replace due to sanctions. Putin told the Russian people their energy wealth made them invincible. But as flames rise from the Caspian Sea, that invincibility is exposed as a myth. You cannot power a military with oil burning at the bottom of the ocean. This pincer movement is ending the Putin era. Internal infrastructure is rotting while Ukraine liquidates production hubs. Putin's disregard for physical reality has left 142 million people trapped in a state that can no longer produce, refine, or transport the fuel it needs to survive the winter. Russia has become the beggar of Eurasia. As of January 2026, fuel shortages paralyzed at least 57 Russian regions, forcing the Kremlin to import gasoline from Belarus just to keep military trucks moving. Data from the St. Petersburg Exchange shows fuel deliveries from Belarus to Russia increased 47-fold. This is an emergency blood transfusion for a dying superpower. Russia, once the world's gas station, is now rationing fuel at its own pumps. In occupied Crimea and 20 other federal subjects, authorities capped gasoline sales at just 10 to 30 liters. This collapse is the result of the Deep Strike campaign, which knocked out 17% of refining capacity and left Putin staring into a $100 billion budget hole. For the 142 million people under this regime, the message is clear. The military machine comes before the Russian home. By begging Minsk for gasoline, the Kremlin admits its energy sector is in terminal failure. The fuel arteries have been sucked dry to pay for a war that turned a global exporter into a client state. The Romanovka explosion sent the economy into freefall. In Russia, a pipeline is a high-pressure vein of cash. When the Central Asia Center artery snapped, it cut the throat of the federal budget. Every second gas stays trapped. The treasury bleeds. Russia is staring into a $100 billion budget hole. A 7.1 trillion ruble crater swallowing the nation. With revenue evaporating, Putin committed the ultimate act of desperation, liquidating the National Wealth Fund. This safety cushion meant to protect 142 million people is being burned to the ground. From $113 billion, liquid assets have shriveled to just $36.4 billion. This is the cannibal phase. Putin is eating his own empire. He is stealing pensions and healthcare to pay for 48 more hours of artillery. While people burn chairs for warmth, the Kremlin burns the nation's savings to keep a failed war alive. The fortress is empty. The bank account reads zero. The $100 billion deficit has reached the Russian dinner table. On January 1st, 2026, the Kremlin tore up the social contract by raising VAT to 22%. This is a direct seizure of wealth from 142 million people already struggling to survive. According to credible resources, this hike will bleed an additional 1.1 trillion rubles from the civilian economy this year. Putin is no longer funding war with oil. He is cannibalizing his citizens' purchasing power. Every loaf of bread now carries a war surcharge. The Kremlin lowered the small business tax threshold to just 10 million rubles, dragging the middle class into a debt trap. The message is unmistakable. Regime survival comes before the people. This is the final stage of the guns versus butter collapse. By taxing 142 million people into poverty, Putin has admitted Fortress Russia was built only for him. The social contract of stability is dead. The $100 billion bankruptcy is now visible. In 2025 alone, 266 settlements were officially liquidated. Villages that stood for centuries are now ghosts. This is the terminal checkmate. Putin tried to project an expanding empire, but the data reveals a nation that is shrinking. While the Kremlin seizes meters of Ukrainian soil, it loses entire regions to decay. The 0 day of January 2026, the exploding pipelines, the freezing apartments, and the burning refineries is the result of a leader who chose ego over survival. Russia's future has been liquidated to pay for its past. As the national wealth fund evaporates, the lights are going out on the Putin era. The bear is being hollowed out and frozen from within by its own government. History will record that 2026 was the year the math finally won. What you just saw was only the beginning of the cracks. The real implosion lies ahead. If you want to know what's really happening behind closed doors, like the video and hit the subscribe button. Stay with MRwarfare. History is about to turn.